Hey friends, thanks so much for being my friends. I appreciate you so much for, taking the time out of your day to watch these videos with me. So today we're going to watch videos on time travelers. I find this topic so interesting because when I was little, I always wanted to try time travel. I always wanted to know if it was real or not. So let's watch and find out together. I mean, we know it's real, right? Because time is an illusion. So there is no such thing as time. So let's see. Let's see.
Hello, my name is Alfred Bielik, more commonly known as Al Bielik. Original family name is Edward Cameron. I have been involved in the Philadelphia experiment, the Montauk Project, time travel, alien connections of the Montauk Project, and some other projects, all of which have been secret over the years, most of which have never been declassified. I wound up in the 28th century, and this was in a time period of 2749 to 2751 AD. Talk about changes in civilization, society, and everything else. It was drastically changed from what we saw in 2137, as this is now 600 years later. The cities were enormous. The cities were beautiful. They had round-based cities, much as we have always had them, but they also had something else. Floating cities. Floating cities, due to anti-gravity techniques being perfected sufficiently that they could float an entire city, which was perhaps not as large as any of our current cities. It was round, or very nearly round, but it floated on this platform, and they could move the city any place they wanted, remaining floating in the air, 4,000 or 5,000 feet above the ground, perhaps, or a little less, depending on what they wanted. But the size of the city was vertical rather than horizontal, 2,200 stories high. That's about 2.5 miles. The cities could move anywhere on the planet. Basically, they stayed hovering and floating. If they didn't like a particular location, they moved somewhere else. There wasn't that much traffic in moving cities, I can assure you, because the world population in that era, the 28th century, was only 500 million, and I was instructed later that was where they had held it for centuries. There would be no more than approximately 500 million population. Some of the features of this, let's start from the political standpoint. As I learned, all of these cities, whether they're ground-based cities, which the majority were, because they had to do manufacturing, they had to have agriculture and various other things to supply the needs of civilization. But all of them, whether floating or ground-based, were rather interesting in their governmental form. They had essentially no government. There's no government as we know it today. There was no money, there's no banks, there's no political jurisdictions, and it resolved down to what would be best called a city-state structure, where the city is a state, and any other cities from that one are independent and operate in their own independent manner. So that was the major change there. There was no elected government, there was no appointed government, there was no government as we had ever seen it in the past. As I found out, each city was run by an intelligent computer, synthetic intelligence, synthetic consciousness, a highly radioactive crystalline structure. Who built them, I had no idea. Nobody seemed to know, but they've been there for hundreds of years. And this computer ran the entire city. There were guidelines set down, there were law books, but no courts. There were guidelines set down as to how you're to behave, what your parameters were. Within these parameters, if anything went, anything was not considered kosher within this realm, this parameter limit, would be expressed as a yellow zone, i.e. a zone that you don't want to go into and you don't want to become involved in that type of behavior. If you got out into that area, you were given an invite for a reprimand to the computer, which there was one in every city, running each city. You would literally be called in for, shall we say, an interview or an audience with the computer, and you would be advised that you had broken the law, but it wasn't considered a felony, it was a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor and such. If you were judged guilty, you were sent off to one of the work camps for whatever purpose they did in the work camps. Very much like today, I presume, where any kind of labor, menial or otherwise, had to be done was done. And that was compulsory, that was not voluntary. If you were called in because you were going outside the yellow zone into what is called the red zone, which is basically what you would today call a felony offense, you were immediately called in for an interview. You were examined, looked at, talked to, and if the computer at that point thought that you were rehabilitable, that you could learn again to be sociable and within the social bounds of normalcy, you were given one more chance. If the computer decided that you were not capable of fitting into society, you were terminated right then and there. Now, there were other people who didn't feel like they could fit into the society, but had not yet committed any of the so-called offenses. Literally, they were allowed to leave. The word was, if you don't like it here, go live somewhere else. Go out in the boonies if you want. Live as a hermit. We don't care. And many did. I do not know what percentage. I was told that quite a lot of people had left the cities and gone out in the boondocks. Whether they formed communities or not, I never did find out. If you weren't required to work, which no one was required to, other than their social obligation, which was well inculcated into the kids, that you had an obligation to contribute to society, to pay for what you have been using and had inherited, for which no money was involved. A sort of credit system was still functional, but otherwise, except for fairly large credit purchases, if that is the right term, they didn't really keep track of very much. It was considered quite free as long as you were able to make some contributions and nobody overloaded the system with demands. That happened very seldom, that there was an overload of demand for goods and services. So as a result of that, there was very little abuse of the system. Now, in this period of time, talking with many people, making friends, I had a number of questions. Who built this computer system? That was my first and foremost question. Who maintains it? What happens when it breaks down? Very common questions. No common answer. Very much uncommon answers. First question about the cities, who built them, who maintains them, who maintains the computers, it's rather hard to answer and get an answer to. No one really knew much about the history of the construction of the city or how it ran, other than the computer, and you couldn't request an interview. You couldn't request to go in and ask questions. The aspect of how these computers communicated with each other was unknown, but it did make, the one I talked with did make a number of interesting statements over a period of time. They had been around for about 250 years in this format and this system.
That's an interesting video. So let's watch.
They literally said this shit out loud and it flew under the radar, y'all. The US government just admitted that they got tech that can manipulate time and space, y'all. This is not a rumor. This is not a movie, not a script, none of that shit. This is real life. The dude that said this, his name is Michael Cresius. He's one of the White House top scientists. This man literally said that we can bend time and annihilate distance. Listen to what he said over my head.
We seem to have lost focus and vision, to have lowered our sights and let systems and structures and bureaucracies muddle us along. But we are capable of so much more. Our technologies permit us to manipulate time and space. They leave distance annihilated, causing us to grow and improve productivity. It is the choices of individuals that will make the new golden age possible. The choice of individuals to master the sclerosis of the state, and the choice of individuals to craft new technologies and give themselves to scientific discoveries that will bend space and time, make more with less, and drive us further into the endless frontier.
My question is, why now? Why tell us now? It's 2025. How long have they been sitting on this? This shit crazy. Y'all remember the Mandela effect, the glitches, all the little deja vu moments you got? This is probably the reason why you was having it. This explains it all. If they can manipulate time and space, just imagine what else they can do. Y'all, think.
And it is so true, because there's so much, like they say that the government sends pigeons to monitor the poverty-stricken areas, just to keep them there. And the government's doing behind so much things that we don't know about. The weather manipulation, right? Controlling the weather. And these natural disasters that are supposed to be natural disasters but are actually from the government. So there's so much different things that the government is aware of and is capable of doing that we as citizens are not aware of. We're blinded to these things because we are under our own illusion that they placed on us. It's like a spell.
They're all gone. The larger species no longer exist. We've got large areas hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, all designated to wind turbines, reflective mirrors, and solar panels. It's one of the few remaining jobs left for residents, but it's also the most dangerous. When children are first born, they're assigned partners, which are called caring ones. These are basically small robots that monitor the child for health conditions. The caring ones are assigned with children up until the age 16 when they're legally able to have children. At times, the caring ones can be assigned for longer durations, whether or not the children have mental instabilities, health issues, and other underlying conditions. These caretakers, or robots, are also allowed to detain civilians or residents as well. They read to the children, they teach the children, they basically do all of the duties of a parent, and it's done like this for a reason. From birth, we're taught that these robots are just as important as your parents or siblings. There are no more schools like you know them to be today. Children are taught with AI. We're taught at a young age that all residents are equal, none being more important than the other. There's no more religion. Religious beliefs are strictly forbidden. The few people that still practice Christianity are forced to live with beneathers, basically, where there's no access to clean water, health care, and so on. For the most part, people just don't jeopardize it and no longer practice religion. Mating is much different. They're all gone. The larger species.
Damn. That sounds rough. Well, that kind of sounds like the rapture or whatever, you know, when they said that people, the Christians or whatever, would be, you know, have to give up Jesus, or, you know, they would die or whatever. I guess it's something like that. But then it's like, why do they have to live on the outskirts, you know, just because they practice religion? That's interesting. I'd like to hear more of this man's story. Probably gonna try to look for some more. If you enjoyed watching these videos with me, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks so much for being my friend.
In the forest deep and green, fairies dance like shadows seen.